Australia is 7.7 million square kilometres, and most people think of Sydney, Melbourne, and the Great Barrier Reef. But somewhere between those postcard landmarks and the red dirt of the interior, there are more than 1,000 towns that burned through everything they had, and disappeared so completely that some of them have been literally removed from the official maps. We are talking about places built on asbestos, uranium, and silver that made fortunes for companies on the other side of the world and left nothing behind for the people who lived there. Stay with us until number 1, because that story is still happening right now, and the legal battle over it is worth $1.5 billion. Number 12. Linda, Tasmania. If you drive the winding road into Tasmania's west coast and turn off before Queenstown, you will find yourself in a valley that looks like it has been through something. The trees are gone. The hillsides are bare and scarred by acid runoff, and sitting in the middle of it all is the hollow concrete shell of what used to be the Royal Hotel. That is Linda. And for a town that most Tasmanians have never heard of, it left behind one of the darkest single days in Australian industrial history. Linda was built in 1897 to service the North Mount Lyell copper mine. By 1900 it had around 600 residents, 4 hotels, a church, and a school. The mine shafts went straight down into unstable, swelling clay and decomposed rock, so ground collapses were common. On the 12th of October, 1912, a fire broke out in the underground shafts and killed 42 workers. It remains one of the worst mining disasters in Tasmanian history. After that, the corporate owners transferred operations to nearby Queenstown and Gormanston, and Linda entered out within years. The Royal Hotel burned down in 1910 and rebuilt in reinforced concrete specifically to resist fire, operated until the 1950s and then fell silent. It is still standing. The dining room where miners once ate their meals recently hosted an art installation designed to honor the 42 men who died underground. The valley around it is still recovering from over a century of acid mine drainage and smelter emissions. Fewer than 10 people live there today. Number 11. Carsack, Western Australia. On the Pilbara coast, at the mouth of the Harding River, there is a cluster of bluestone buildings that once made Western Australia's pearling industry possible. Carsack was established in 1863, renamed after the HMS Carsack in 1871, and by the mid-1880s it had a fleet of more than 80 pearl luggers working the harbour. It was the economic engine of the entire northwest coast, and it ran almost entirely on forced and coerced Indigenous labour. Aboriginal men and women were compelled to dive naked from the luggers in deep water to harvest the shells that built fortunes for people who never set foot in the Pilbara. The collapse of Carsack came from 2 directions at once. The local pearl beds were exhausted by the late 1880s, and the Harding River harbour silted up so badly that modern steamships could not use it. By 1904, the shipping had moved to Point Sampson, and the municipal council was dissolved in 1910. The internment of the remaining Japanese residents at the start of the Second World War finished off whatever was left. Today, the Ngaluma people are the traditional custodians of this country. The bluestone buildings have been restored and are managed by the city of Karratha as a heritage tourism precinct. Every year, the site hosts the Carsack Art Awards. It is a beautiful place in the kind of way that reminds you how much was taken here to make it possible. Number 10. Joadja, New South Wales. 2 hours southwest of Sydney, hidden inside a steep sandstone valley in the southern highlands, there is a place where the ruins of a kerosene refinery are slowly being overtaken by bush, and somewhere in the middle of all that, someone has opened a whisky distillery. That is Joadja, and it is one of the stranger stories of industrial rise and fall on this continent. The oil shale outcrops in the valley walls were noticed in the 1850s, and by 1876 the Australian Kerosene Oil and Mineral Company had moved in. Because the valley was geographically isolated, the company built an entirely self-contained town of between 1,200 and 1,300 residents, most of them skilled miners recruited from Scotland. They built Carrington Row, 14 brick houses shaded by sycamore and acacia trees, along with a schoolhouse, a boarding house, and a cemetery with 124 known burials. To get the refined kerosene, paraffin wax, and candles out of the valley, they built a horse-powered incline railway up the southern cliffs. 2 horses walking in a circle on an 11-metre platform, turning a whim that hauled carts up the steep incline. The whole operation ran for about 30 years before cheaper American and Russian petroleum flooded the market and made shale-derived kerosene unviable. Mining stopped in 1903. The property changed hands, the Scots went home or moved on, and the valley went quiet. It sat that way for most of the 20th century. Then in 2014, the Jimenez family established a single malt whisky and gin distillery in the valley, using the natural spring water and on-site barley fields. They make their spirits among the brick ruins of a 19th century refinery, on land that still carries the memory of the Scottish community that built it. The Gundungurra people are the traditional custodians of this country. Number 9. Altunga, Northern Territory. To reach Altunga in 1887, you had to walk 600 kilometers across the desert from the nearest railway line at Oodnadatta. There was no road, no reliable water source, and summer temperatures that regularly exceeded 40 degrees. People did it anyway, because gold had been found in the East MacDonnell Ranges, and in the late 19th century that was enough. By the late 1890s, Altunga had around 300 residents and the infrastructure of a functioning remote town, a government battery to crush ore, a post office, a police station. The stone buildings were constructed with step-down floors to insulate against the desert heat. Water and food came in by camel teams carrying large metal canteens. The lack of fresh vegetables was so severe that scurvy was common, and the death rate at the White Range Cemetery reflects it. The police station, built in 1899, served as the law enforcement centre for an enormous area of Central Australia. Local records describe prisoners being chained to the constable's iron bedstead when the jail was full. Mining stopped by 1913, and the desert moved in. Today, the site is managed as the Altunga Historical Reserve by NT Parks. You can walk through the stabilised stone ruins of the police station, the jail cell, the government battery, and the underground mine workings. The Arrernte people are the traditional custodians. The ruins have been sitting in that heat for over a century, and the desert has not finished with them yet. Number 8. Kyandra, New South Wales. In November 1859, mountain cattlemen discovered gold on a high subalpine plain in the Snowy Mountains. Within 4 months, more than 10,000 miners and storekeepers had arrived at an elevation of 1,400 metres, in what would become Australia's highest and coldest gold mining town. At its peak, Kyandra had around 15,000 people, 14 hotels, and 25 stores. It also had something no other Australian gold town had: Norwegian miners who had brought their skis with them. They called them snowshoes, manufactured them locally, and in 1861 established what became the Kyandra Pioneer Ski Club, running annual races on Township Hill for over a century before relocating to Perisher Valley. That is how recreational skiing came to Australia, through a gold rush in the Snowy Mountains. The gold itself was always shallow. The alluvial deposits were exhausted within 18 months of the rush, and by 1861 the population had stabilised at around 350. The town limped on for decades, a small community in an extreme environment, before finally being abandoned in the mid-20th century. The last permanent resident left in 1974. The National Parks and Wildlife Service demolished most of the remaining wooden structures after the town was abandoned, a decision that still generates controversy among local historians. The 2019 to 2020 bushfires took the bluestone courthouse that had been built in 1890. It has since been rebuilt for a third time. The Ngarigo and Woolgaloo people are the traditional custodians of this country. Number 7. Valhalla, Victoria. Hit subscribe if you want more of this, because number 6 is about a town that was built to process uranium and then systematically erased from the earth. But first, Valhalla. There is a valley in Victoria's Gippsland Ranges so steep and narrow that when they finally completed a railway line to reach it in 1910, the town it was built to serve was already dying. That is Valhalla, and the story of how it went from 4,000 residents to fewer than 20 is almost entirely a story about wood. Gold was discovered in Stringer's Creek in late 1862. The subsequent discovery of Cohen's Reef, the largest single quartz gold reef in Victoria, triggered a rush, and the Long Tunnel Mining Company eventually extracted more than 30 tons of gold from beneath the valley floor. To crush the quartz ore, they needed steam-powered stamp batteries. Those batteries needed wood. The hillsides for kilometers around Valhalla were stripped completely bare, and timber tramways had to be built to haul wood from increasingly distant ridges just to keep the boilers running. The town was consuming the landscape that surrounded it. By the early 1900s, the cost of hauling timber had risen to the point where mining was no longer viable. The mines closed in 1914. The population, which had been 2,061 at the turn of the century, fell to 235 by 1921 and down to 54 by 1961. The railway line, the one they built to save the town, stopped running to Valhalla in 1944. Today it is managed as a historic park. A portion of the narrow gauge railway has been rebuilt for tourist trains, the historic post office and shops have been restored, and on the steep hillside above the town there is a cemetery with more than 1,100 people buried in it. The Gunai Kurnai people are the traditional custodians. The valley has grown its trees back. Number 6. Silverton, New South Wales. In the far west of New South Wales, on the traditional lands of the Wilgicali people, there is a town of 48 people that has appeared in more than 140 films. Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, was shot here. So were scenes from Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and A Town Like Alice. The wide red dirt streets, the sandstone buildings, and the flat emptiness stretching to the horizon in every direction have made Silverton one of the most filmed places in the country. What the film crews are standing in is the wreckage of a silver rush. A rich silver lode was found here in 1875. Silverton was proclaimed a town in 1880, and by the 1890s around 3,000 people lived here. It had a municipal council, a jail, a courthouse, and a tramway line connecting the mines to the South Australian Railway network. The Daydream Mine, which opened in 1882, employed child labourers as young as 8 years old in harsh underground conditions. The collapse was sudden and thorough. A massive silver lead zinc or body was found at Broken Hill, just down the road, in 1883. Within years, residents were literally dismantling their iron and canvas homes and hauling them to Broken Hill to reassemble there. The municipality was dissolved in 1907. Silverton went from a city to a near ruin inside a generation. Today, 48 people live there. The Silverton Hotel operates out of the former post office building, and Adrian Bennett's Mad Max 2 Museum, opened in 2010, displays original vehicles, props, and costumes from the film. The post-apocalyptic landscape the filmmakers were looking for was already there. They just had to show up. Number 5, Gwalia, Western Australia. In 1897, a London-based syndicate sent a young American geologist to manage a new gold mine in the remote Great Victoria Desert, 233 kilometres north of Kalgoorlie. His name was Herbert Hoover. He later became the 31st President of the United States. While he was at Gwalia, he cut costs by replacing Anglo-Celtic miners with cheaper Italian immigrant labour, which caused physical confrontations in the streets and left a tension in the town that lasted for years. Under Hoover's management and those that followed, the Sons of Gwalia became the deepest incline shaft gold mine in Australia. Unlike the vertical shafts common elsewhere, this mine used a rare inclined timber headframe, still standing today, and a 1912 steam-powered window to haul ore from underground. The town reached a peak of 1,114 residents in 1910, had its own tram line to the neighbouring town of Leonora, and the first government-owned hotel in the state. A major underground fire in 1921 destroyed half the mine and laid off 400 men. Operations restarted in 1923 but never fully recovered, and when the underground headframe collapsed on the 21st of December, 1963, the mine closed immediately. Gwalia's population dropped from 1,200 to 40 in less than 3 weeks. Families packed what they could and left. The rest stayed where it was. The modern chapter added its own disasters. A flight carrying 7 mine employees and a pilot crashed near Burketown in the year 2000 after the crew failed to land and ran out of fuel. The reopened company, Sons of Gwalia NL, collapsed in 2004 with debts exceeding $800 million after its chief financial officer conducted over $190 million in unauthorized gold trading. The mine today is Australia's deepest underground gold operation, with workings below 1,600 metres and plans to reach 2,300 metres by 2031. The historic town site is preserved as an outdoor museum. 22 restored miners' cottages, the original inclined timber headframe, and Hoover House, which operates as a bed and breakfast overlooking the open-cut pit. The Wongatha people are the traditional custodians. Number 4, Cook, South Australia. On the Nullarbor Plain, on the longest straight stretch of railway in the world, there is a town where one couple manages the fuel and water for the Indian Pacific passenger train and almost nobody else lives. The wide main street is deserted. The hospital is empty. The school is empty. The community hall is empty. Cook was built for a technology that moved on, and the town could not follow it. Cook was established in 1917 during the construction of the Trans-Australian Railway, named after Prime Minister Joseph Cook, and designed as a steam engine servicing station on a line that crosses hundreds of kilometres of treeless limestone plain with no other source of fuel or water. At its peak, it had around 400 residents, a hospital, a school, a general store, and a local power system. A weekly supply train called the Tea and Sugar ran the length of the Nullarbor corridor, delivering fresh food, water, and medical supplies to Cook and the other isolated settlements along the line. Then diesel locomotives replaced steam engines. Diesel engines can travel the Nullarbor without stopping to refuel every few hundred kilometres, so the servicing station became redundant. Continuous welded rail and concrete sleepers replaced the older track, reducing the maintenance crews that had kept Cook staffed. The tea and sugar train made its final run on the 30th of August, 1996. After that, there was no longer a reason for Cook to exist. Today, it is a refueling siding in the middle of a wilderness protection area, maintained by the couple who live there. When the Indian Pacific stops, passengers can walk the deserted main street for 20 minutes before the train moves on. The Mirning people are the traditional custodians of the Nullarbor. Number 3. Farina, South Australia. 600 kilometres north of Adelaide, in the South Australian Outback, the ruins of a town called Farina are being slowly saved from the desert by retired volunteers who drive out every winter and spend weeks stabilising the stone walls. The reason the town needs saving at all is that it was built in the wrong place, and the people who built it were told so before they started. In 1865, Surveyor General George Goyder mapped the limits of reliable rainfall across South Australia. The line he drew, Goyder's line, was a boundary north of which he said the land was too arid for sustained agriculture. Colonial developers established Farina in 1876, approximately 300 kilometres north of that line, during a temporarily wet climatic period. They renamed the town Farina, Latin for flour, in the belief it would become a major wheat district. They built 2 breweries, a transcontinental hotel, a bakery, a school, 5 blacksmiths, and a brothel. The broader regional population reached nearly 900 in the 1891 census. The population that gathered here was remarkable in its diversity: European settlers, Chinese labourers, Indigenous Australians, and Afghan camel drivers all working the same remote outpost. Farina was also the staging point for the shipment of South Australia's largest meteorite, a 1.2-tonne iron meteorite dragged out of the desert by camel team and railed to Adelaide from Farina Station. The good rainfall was a temporary anomaly. By the turn of the century, consecutive droughts had destroyed the wheat crops, exactly as Goyder had calculated. The railway extension pushed the transit trade further north, and the copper and silver mines closed in 1927. The town was finally abandoned in the 1980s when the railway line was pulled up completely. Since 2009, the Farina Restoration Group has organised annual winter volunteer programs to stabilise the stone ruins and run the historic underground bakery for tourists. The Adnai Mathanya and Dieri peoples are the traditional custodians of this country. The desert is still trying to take what is left. Number 2. Mary Kathleen, Queensland. Between Mount Isa and Cloncurry in northwestern Queensland, there is a cattle property where visitors park their caravans on concrete slabs that used to be the foundations of houses. If you look carefully, you can find the stone water fountain that once stood in the centre of a town square. And at the edge of the property, there is an open-cut pit filled with brilliant turquoise water, a colour produced by chemical leaching from the mine walls, that looks inviting and will kill you. This is Mary Kathleen. It was a uranium town, and when the uranium ran out, Rio Tinto took everything except the slabs. The deposit was found in 1954, named after prospector Norm McConaughey's late wife. A major sales contract with the UK Atomic Energy Authority in 1956 funded the construction of a fully planned town built at the rate of 1 house per day. At its peak, Mary Kathleen had around 1,000 residents, a community store, a cinema, a hospital, an Olympic-sized swimming pool with bright blue tiles, and on-site orchards watered by a pipeline from Lake Corella. The mine ran from 1958 to 1963, extracted its initial uranium contracts, and then stopped. The town emptied. 12 families stayed behind to watch over the quiet streets. In 1974, the mine reopened to supply Japanese, German, and American power utilities. When the reserves were exhausted in 1982, the closure was total and systematic. By the end of 1984, every house, every public building, and all commercial equipment had been auctioned and removed. Rio Tinto left behind the concrete slabs, the water fountain, and the radioactive pit. The Kalkadoon people are the traditional custodians of this country. Today, the site is a free camping ground. People park their caravans on the house slabs. The turquoise pit sits at the edge of the property, beautiful and toxic, a monument to what was taken and what was left behind. Number 1. Wittenoom, Western Australia. There is a town in the Pilbara that the Western Australian government removed from the official maps in 2007. They took down the road signs. They cut off the electricity in 2006. They passed legislation in 2022 to formally close it. In May 2023, they began physically demolishing the remaining structures. The last residents were not locals who chose to stay. They were the last of roughly 20,000 people who lived and worked there over the years, in a town built on one of the most dangerous substances on Earth. Wittenoom was a blue asbestos town. Crocidolite, the deadliest form of asbestos, was mined from Wittenoom Gorge from the 1930s, and in 1947 the company, Australian Blue Asbestos Limited, built a proper planned town to stabilise the workforce. It grew to become the largest settlement in the Pilbara through the 1950s. The milling process generated more than 3 million tonnes of toxic tailings, and those tailings were spread through the townsite, through the schoolyards, and across the airport to suppress dust. Children played in it. Families built their lives in it. The company knew what they were handling and kept operating anyway. When falling profits and high transport costs made the mine unviable, CSR closed operations on the 31st of December, 1966. Not because of the deaths, because of the numbers. By 2024, more than 2,000 former workers and residents had died of asbestos-related diseases, predominantly malignant mesothelioma. The median exposure period for that cohort was approximately 18 months. 18 months of living in Wittenoom was enough. The site now covers 46,840 hectares of declared contaminated land, the largest contaminated site in the Southern Hemisphere, roughly equivalent to 1/5 the size of the Chernobyl exclusion zone. And here is the part that is still open. In February 2026, the Banjima Native Tidal Aboriginal Corporation, representing the traditional owners who have been disconnected from their own country by decades of contamination, launched a $1.5 billion legal claim against the Western Australian government. The lawsuit demands the state seal the 3 abandoned asbestos mines, clear the tailings dumps, and remove asbestos from the former racecourse and airport. The government passed legislation to close the township but left every ton of waste where it sat today. The Banjima people cannot return to their country. The asbestos is still there. Wittenoom tops this list not because it is the oldest or the most remote, but because the distance between what was done there and what has been acknowledged is the widest of anything on this list. The town was removed from the maps. The waste was not. If you want more Australian history that the road signs don't cover, subscribe. We go deep every week.